Gambit never folds!
Hello, Rivals fans, and welcome back to the Rivals Report, the show that gets you up to speed on Rivals Esports news in a nice, bite-sized package. My name is Diatonic, and this is the Rivals Report number 24 for the week of November 17th, 2025. On this week's report, we're recapping the recently concluded Season 4 of the Marvel Rivals Championship, featuring some banger matches and the hottest up-and-coming players in the game. We're also doing a community catch-up, checking in on both the new tournament circuit being run by Battle of the Orgs and the latest from the Collegiate Rivals Series Fall Split. While much of the attention over the past couple weeks has been on that Grand Finals LAN tournament at DreamHack Atlanta, competition has been brewing in the Tier 2 scene as well. Teams converged once again for another round of the Marvel Rivals Championship, and it's clear that things have been heating up here in Season 4. Let's take a look back at the conclusion of the Season 4 MRC across the Americas, EMEA, and Pacific regions. In the NA MRC, a mix of some old Tier 2 faces and a few former Ignite competitors entered the fray. Names like Rad, Nightmare, Shikigami, Outlast, Cafe Rose, and others threw their hats in the ring for a shot at the nearly $15,000 prize pool. There were plenty of hard-pounding matches and dramatic finishes, but let's highlight a few of the stories coming out of this region to get you up to speed. Nightmare Academy made their MRC debut in this season, a team consisting of the core formerly known as Project Blue Lock. They had a long road ahead of them in this tournament, fighting out of the lower bracket since at least round 10. But their first major challenge in this tournament came in the form of Shikigami in the lower bracket quarterfinals, a name that's been involved in Rivals since the early days. Shikigami would come out of the gate swinging, picking up wins on Krakoa and Central Park back-to-back. The pressure was mounting, but Nightmare would kick things into overdrive on Celestial Husk and hang on to their last tournament life. Shikigami would make them sweat once again on Burnin' T'Challa, but Nightmare would bounce back and even the score, taking us all the way to Yggdrasil Path for map number 5. This map was an absolute barn burner, with both teams initially clearing the map and forcing it into extra rounds. It'd be a teeth-gritted, white-knuckle battle to the very end, but Nightmare would just manage to find the breakthrough and eke out the final map win against Shikigami, taking the series 3-2. They'd be facing off against Cafe Rose in those finals, a team that's seen a great deal of success in the Tier 2 and community tournament scene. Cafe Rose were also sent down to the lower bracket by Yeah We Lost, who defeated the Cafe team in a 3-0 sweep, advancing to Grand Finals from there. The lower bracket finals kicked off on Hell's Heaven, where Nightmare seemed to cool off a bit. Cafe Rose would pick up a 2-0 win on that first map, then keep the ball rolling on Central Park with a close 3-2 finish there. Nightmare had been in this situation before, facing down a potential sweep from Shikigami earlier in the tournament, and they looked for the reverse sweep once again as they took a big win on Yggdrasil Path for map 3. But where it seemed like they were poising themselves for another huge comeback, Cafe Rose are ready to cut them down with a 2-0 final win on Krakoa. And that led us to the MRC Season 4 Grand Finals for the NA region, a rematch of the upper bracket finals between Cafe Rose and new team Yeah We Lost. YWL dropped only 2 maps in the upper bracket quarters, semis, and finals, giving them a groundswell of momentum going into this final match. Cafe Rose were a force to be reckoned with as well, though, having been competitive in a number of community tournaments over the past couple seasons. But YWL would repeat the same story from upper finals yet again here, winning map after map after map, until they had finally claimed the Season 4 crown for themselves in a stunning 4-0 finish. Hopping over to the EMEA region next, we saw a similar lineup of old and new faces vying for the title here, with several Saudi Arabian teams entering the fray and coming from other Rivals tournaments like the Prime E-League series. But we also saw some known Tier 2 quantities such as Planet Sainage, and even a content creator team in the form of Weeban DD. That team housed several competitors from the Daredevil Charity Tournament, including Grapha, Luke the Ninja, Frankie Boxing, and even the mastermind behind the tournament itself, Team Captain. Planet Sainage cut their teeth on community tournaments such as the Rivals Ascension League and Galactus Gauntlet, and they also tried their hand at the Ignite Stage 2 Open Qualifiers. Looking to keep themselves sharp, they blazed a path of destruction through the first portion of the tournament and took a 3-0 win over Legends in the upper bracket quarterfinals. But Silent Nova, a team featuring some top talent from Saudi Arabia's Prime E-League series, gave them some trouble and sent them down to the lower bracket. There, they'd face off with Virtus Dano, a mostly Russian team with some seasoned veterans in their own right. It was a brutal battle to the very end, with both teams trading wins map after map until it was Planet Sainage emerging victorious in a brutal 3-2 series. They'd advance to the lower bracket semifinals, but would be finished off by EU team Crocsbrain in a 1-3 defeat. But the finals of the EMEA MRC would ultimately come down to a Saudi civil war. Silent Nova would continue their upper bracket run, defeating Crownfall 3-0 to qualify for the grand finals. But Crownfall would run it back against Crocsbrain in the lower finals, scraping by in a 3-2 victory to climb to the grand finals for a rematch against Silent Nova. But Crownfall would prove to be stronger in this matchup, coming right out of the gate with a close win over Silent Nova on Celestial Husk. But that would light a fire under Nova, and they'd hack and slash through Crownfall, taking big wins on Krakoa and Central Park. They'd win on Yggdrasil Path as well, but they seemed to be running out of steam, only besting Crownfall on that map 3-2. CF would clap back on Hell's Heaven, winning 2-1 and surviving to map 6 of this series. But Silent Nova would finish them off on Hall of Djalia, closing out the series and taking the Season 4 crown 4-2. And in the Pacific MRC, an OCE Ignite Stage 1 competitor would make a triumphant return here, going to war with a relatively new team stacked with veteran competitors. Xavier Hope, originally spotted during Stage 1 of Ignite, were back in action here, though some of their core have departed from the team. They'd square off against 6969X, a new quantity made up of players formerly of teams like Brainstorm Esports, Fury, The Vicious, and even Asia's Yoyang Wan. Xavier Hope first squared off with 6-9 in the upper bracket quarterfinals, where Xavier would hand them a 3-0 sweep, then continue on through the upper bracket to grand finals. 6-9 would go on an absolute tear in the lower bracket from there, dropping a single map to Descent Esports, then clearing the rest without dropping any further maps for 4 rounds. That would have them crossing paths with Xavier Hope yet again in the grand finals, but 6-9 were moving different in that final matchup. Xavier Hope looked to best them once again, picking up early big wins on Krakoa and Spider Islands. But after losing 5 maps in a row to them, accounting for upper bracket quarterfinals, 6-9 would finally break the streak with a close win on Yggdrasil Path. But that wasn't quite enough to move the needle, as Xavier would park themselves on match point after winning Hell's Heaven 2-0 after that. But following that loss, something changed. 6-9 started winning fights, finding value, and they began racking up map wins. They made mincemeat of Xavier on Midtown, shredded them on Central Park, and then on the final map of Burn T'Challa, they'd shut out their rivals and ascend to the throne of Season 4 Pack Champions. And that wraps up our look back at the Season 4 MRCs across the board. The competition here is heated as always, and with Ignite currently moving into the off-season, the Marvel Rivals Championship will be the place to get an early look at the potential Tier 1 competitors for next year. The seeds are being planted, new legacies are being written, and some players are entering the fray with aspirations of aiming for an even grander stage of competition next year. But only time will tell who will be called up next. Also this week, we're catching up on some of the community tournament action we missed in the wake of Ignite Grand Finals. And on the community tournament front, Battle of the Orgs is back and better than ever with what they're dubbing their Series 1 competition. We've got all the info on how it works, and a look at some highlights from one of the most hated qualifiers yet. Here's how it works. Like before, teams are invited to participate in regular weekly tournaments featuring small prize pools to get the competition going. Series 1 is planned to take place over 8 of those events, what Bodo refers to as qualifiers. As teams pick up wins throughout the 8 qualifiers, they're earning points to try and qualify into a premier bracket at the end of the qualifier series, the Sour Showdown series sponsored by League Trolley. But only 16 teams will make it in, so the week-to-week competition is fiercer than ever at Battle of the Orgs. I was in the booth for qualifier number 3 alongside Monteneva and Vaudable, and we had some absolute banger matchups for this one. We kicked off qualifier 3 with a heavy hitter matchup between 2 top competitors from the Season 4 MRC, Rat Academy and Outlast. Outlast have been Bodo champions in the past, while Rat Academy are dipping their toes in for the first time here. These teams kicked off this series with an incredibly close matchup on Burn T'Challa. Outlast attempted a strange portal recontest during overtime on point 2, but Rat Academy pushed them back through at the last second to take map 1. Convergence action for map 2 as we headed for Hall of Djalia, with Outlast on the attack first. Rat Academy locked in a last-second defensive effort, stopping them extremely short of checkpoint 2 and leaving the door wide open for themselves. But Outlast defenses were up going into halftime, and it would take Rat Academy all their time to get the payload unlocked and on the move. But Rad would play right on through and march the payload to the very end for the series win. The next matchup featured a pair of Tier 2 teams we've seen at least once on the Rivals Report before, as Iliad Achilles would be taking on the console team Ending Strike in the second round. This Iliad squad made a strong showing on Burn T'Challa for map 1, taking Ending Strike to all 3 points, but after an absolute nail-biter of a point 3, it'd be Ending Strike jumping out ahead in the series. Hall of Djalia once again was the stage for map 2, and the stage for a visceral Ending Strike offensive run here. They'd tear through the map with 246 left in the bank, and would go on to completely shut out Iliad Achilles for a big win. We'd stick with Ending Strike as they met their next opponents, and a team we've already heard from on this very report, Nightmare Academy. They kicked off this round 3 series on Krakoa to change things up. The first point was brutal for Ending Strike, with Nightmare clearing it 0 to 100. They'd battle back on the second point, a far more competitive fight with several flips back and forth, eventually ending in a 99-99 war that'd go Ending Strike's way. The console team would find the upper hand on point 3, pushing it all the way to 99% before Nightmare would find a chance to respond. But they would find the opportunity to clap back, and clap back they did, clawing their way to a Map 1 victory with some vicious team fight wins. Central Park was up next for Map 2, and Ending Strike would kick things off with a solid push, stopping just a few meters short of a map clear. But that would grant Nightmare the opportunity to win this series right here, and they'd take full advantage. They'd steamroll through on Central Park, speed running to the end of the map with a whopping 3:35 still on the clock as they'd send Ending Strike packing and qualify for the grand finals. And that win over Ending Strike would put Nightmare Academy on a direct collision course with their Academy peers at Rad, giving us a Nightmare vs. Rad matchup to close out the show. The grand finals would kick off on Celestial Husk, and it was a blazing hot match right out of the gate, with point 1 going to Rad after a 99-99 overtime battle. Nightmare would come back to win point 2, but in the final point, Rad would manage to scrape through and secure the first map of the series. Hall of Djalia was back once more as Nightmare clung to their last life, but Rad would feast as they kicked things off on offense, blazing through the entire map and ending with over 3 minutes in the bank. It was a massive mountain for Nightmare to try and scale, but they'd certainly try, putting on a similar offensive performance and managing to clear the map as well. But they'd be playing under a big time disparity in those extra rounds, being awarded just 60 seconds to try and make their case. They'd managed to clear 2 ticks of the first checkpoint, but with 2 minutes remaining, Rad would put Nightmare to bed and take home the series and tournament win. Battle of the Orgs is certainly heating up these days, and the dedicated team behind these events is always looking to up their game. They've got new graphics, new production, and of course, a massive prize pool awaiting the top team at the end of this long road. But there's still more where that came from, with 4 more qualifiers still to go, and plenty of time for teams to get in the mix and get some points. We'll keep you updated as the qualifiers progress, but if you and your squad think you have what it takes, hit the Discord link in the description to get in on the action. And in college rivals news, we're checking back in with the Collegiate Rivals Series as they approach the end of the Swiss phase of their fall split. Week 7 has just finished wrapping up over the weekend, leaving just 1 week of Swiss competition left before the playoff cut is finalized. The top half of the field will be the ones to survive that cut and get their shot at the $2,500 prize pool in the fall playoffs, but some teams are still fighting hard to make the cut. Soren, CB, and myself were in the booth to bring you some do-or-die action during Week 7 of Swiss, so let's take a look at those matchups. The first match of the broadcast was between St. Clair College and Iowa State. 2 teams that were sitting in qualifying positions, but somewhat in the danger zone as a loss here could have possibly dropped them out of contention. We headed for Spider Islands for Map 1, where Iowa State came strong out of the gate. It would be an insanely high KO game, but St. Clair would slowly wear down the Iowa State offense until they were able to find the stop just short of a map clear. Switching sides, St. Clair would struggle just before checkpoint 2, but they gritted their teeth and found the breakthrough they needed, and the Saints would march into the castle and make it theirs, taking the lead in the series. Iowa State looked to get back in the fight on Hell's Heaven, and it again looked good for them from the start, but St. Clair were keeping the pressure on as they took point number 1. St. Clair stumbled a bit on point 2 even as they took a big progress lead, and though Iowa State would make the flip and try to hang in there, St. Clair would take them by surprise at the end, making the flip mid-team fight and closing out the series 2-0. Our second match had the Scarlet Knights from Rutgers taking on Clemson Orange, with both teams at the time on the outside of playoff qualifications looking to battle their way in. Hell's Heaven was the opener for this series, and it'd be all Rutgers to kick things off here. They held point 1 with an iron grip, and though Clemson would return fire on point 2, Rutgers would wrestle control away and make it a 2-0 win on the first map. DVS tagged in on Clemson's side as we traveled to Midtown next, with Clemson on the attack first, but Rutgers would not relent. They managed to hold Clemson short of scoring a single checkpoint here, and then went for the coup de grace as we switched sides one last time. It would take a couple of minutes, but Rutgers would make it game, set, match on Midtown. We have just 1 more week at the Swiss stage of CRS before we head into the highly anticipated fall playoffs. We already saw teams giving it their all this week to try and lock in their playoff positions, and no doubt we'll be seeing some dramatic final matches this coming weekend as Swiss wraps up. Be sure to tune into the CRS Twitch channel on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern for the final fights, and stay tuned for playoffs. Link is in the description. Well, that's all for this week's Rivals Report. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on the latest in Marvel Rivals Esports. And be sure to follow me on other platforms including Twitch, X, and TikTok. I've been Diatonic, you've been amazing, and I'll see you in-game.